Thank you all for joining us for this session of the Women in Philanthropy series on fundraising fundamentals. We know in this line of work that women give more to charity than men. And when women do give, they give a larger percentage of their income than their male counterparts. And women tend to spend and spread their giving across more organizations. And as such, as we see the landscape take shape and continue taking shape, our firm at CCS sort of reflects that type of change in the landscape as well. And we're featuring this series to introduce and reintroduce some of the female leadership at our firm and some of the wonderful female volunteers that we work alongside with at our clients. I'd love to begin just with a quick introduction of myself on the next slide. I'm Aashika Patel. I'm a partner and managing director at the firm and have worked with over 65 projects at CCS, most of them being campaigns. And I have the great privilege and honor to work with the San Diego History Center in Balboa Park in San Diego, with Julie Connolly, who is the campaign chair, a volunteer in San Diego, a fourth generation San Diegan, and an incredible philanthropist who is leading the charge in making amazing change across the region. You're going to hear from Julie a little bit later in our conversation, and I'll ask that she give us a more thorough introduction then. But in the meantime, I will shape up our conversation in a few different segments. If we flip to the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit just about our firm. We consider ourselves a fundraising solutions firm that's been in the business for over 75 years. We are a generalist firm, so we serve all types of nonprofit clients, thinking about the ways to grow philanthropic capacity. Generally, when we meet organizations, they'll come to us with some sort of challenge or some sort of goal or a desire to change the way that fundraising looks, feels, or is experienced by their donors in their community. And in responding to these challenges, we pride ourselves in being able to take a local perspective with the sort of access to regional and national insights and understanding from the over 700 partnerships that we engage in each year. Our fundraising experience and our deep expertise is part of the reason that we are a 90% repeat or referral business. And our large team is beneficial in that we're able to share information among the group about what is working, what isn't working, and how is the landscape of philanthropy changing rapidly and in real time. What do we have to learn from that, and how can we help use that to make more informed decisions? In our time together today, we've got 1 hour. I'm going to start us off talking a little bit about the key pillars of fundraising that will likely not be new to anyone on the call. It's sort of the core anchor areas or the cornerstones of the work that we do, but I'd kind of like to talk about them from my perspective as a woman leader in philanthropy, but also my perspective of how some of these things are taking shape or manifesting in real time. And we'll use that to set the stage to talk a little bit about the San Diego History Center and hear from Julie as a volunteer, as a donor, as a supporter, how these different areas of fundraising or how these pillars of fundraising really take shape in the campaign that she is leading. And then after that, we'll wrap up with a look ahead at philanthropically in the world of fundraising. What are some trends we should be thinking about or be mindful of, especially as women looking to lead other women in the way of philanthropy and fundraising, looking to engage more female donors of color, and more people in general across the organizations we serve to give to the work that we do and move those missions forward. All right, we can move to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. So these shouldn't be new to anyone, right? This idea that the 4 pillars of fundraising are a strong case for support or a rationale or a reason for giving, leadership that helps to anchor the work that you do or the cause that you're raising money for. And when we say leadership, we think about this in 2 ways: volunteer leadership, who really are the reason that in fundraising we find that the greatest gifts, the largest gifts, come from peer-to-peer influence and ask. But it also includes leadership internally, administratively, executive leadership, and senior leadership. Prospects are a big part of the work that we do too. When I started in this field 15 years ago, when we would think about prospect analysis, we were really reliant on previous giving, first time gift, last gift date, some of these data points that were static and historical. And now when we think about fundraising and we think about fundraising and future projections, we're really looking at things like AI and predictive modeling to inform how our prospect landscape today is going to influence what it looks like tomorrow. And then lastly, the plan. When we thought about the plan, we sort of thought about, well, is it, these different events that we're planning? Is it these one-off appeals that we're running? But now when we think about campaign planning, we're thinking about not just strategy, but how do we measure that strategy? How do we put that strategy on a timeline so that these things happen and we're able to measure the success of them or measure where we missed the mark and then pivot and move forward accordingly? Donor acquisition, donor retention, those are some of the hardest things to sort of consider when it comes to prospect management. We all know that it's more difficult to acquire a donor than it is to retain a donor. But in today's landscape, retention is actually becoming, just as difficult as acquisition. There are more and more nonprofit organizations, nonprofit causes that are popping up. The sense of urgency around nonprofit mission is changing because the world is changing so quickly, and the natural disaster needs, the social needs, the humanitarian needs, those are constantly shifting and evolving. And so organizations have this responsibility as they're doing prospect mapping and prospect planning to think about how the pipeline for donor prospect management is going to account for new acquisition at a pace that's probably going to be greater than what we've seen in the past, and then also account for retention and the lack of attrition that we might see in sort of near-term or longer-term futures. So we have to bring in other strategies or creative strategies to be able to combat that. And so while we're working with the same fundamentals that we've really always been working, at least us at CCS in how long we've been doing this work, we're finding that each of these areas are kind of manifesting in different ways or requiring us to consider our approach to them in more innovative and just more creative ways. So the case for support, and I'd love to use, just briefly, without taking too much away from our conversation we're going to have later, the History Center as kind of an example of an inspiring case for support. When we think about history, we often think about just the fact that there are different ways of thinking about and memorializing history, that there are different ways that people tell the story of history. And then there's just the relevancy of history and the fact that it's not always the most relevant thing to all people. And so when faced with a campaign for the History Center, the case for support, the case for why this project should be important for all, becomes a really interesting and exciting puzzle to kind of piece together. And all of the are the solutions and the progress that we've made in what I believe is a really compelling and truly visionary case for support for the History Center, history reimagined. I think about the fact that we spent a lot of time considering what are the big ideas here. If we want to think about the next 100 years of the History Center, it's not just business as usual. We're not going to continue to tell this story in the same way. And I think the same goes for other organizational campaigns that we're currently working with, the San Diego Museum of Art, or thinking a little bit about the campaign at the University of San Diego. It just so happens that all these projects are taking place, in the same location, but the big ideas for each of these organizations are different. And they seek to take the increased philanthropy and do something greater than what they're doing right now. Being able to capture that language and codify it in a way that connects to people and really speaks to people such that they can see themselves in the giving narrative is really one of the hardest and most important objectives of the case for support. The argument for why someone should give should be compelling, and it should present donors with a unique opportunity. This is also growing more and more sort of difficult. How do you make your unique opportunity stand out from all of the sort of competing campaigns that might be happening in your city, in your region, in your similar sector? And generally, the answer to this question is through relationship building. When we find out what prospects really want, what does meaningful connection truly mean to them, not as a constituent, but as an individual, we're able to sort of develop these unique giving opportunities that stand alone, stand aside from competition with other organizations, and sort of really bring people into the campaign case for support in a way that speaks directly to them. I also think about impact as part of the case for support and sense of urgency. These two things are closely linked. People want to know where their dollars are going to go. And more importantly, how are those dollars going to leverage other dollars to flow into the organization, but allow the work that you do towards mission to not just expand, but to exponentially grow. And so, a slight expansion would be doing some things in a bigger way. If you have a program that's really successful, you'd grow that program to be a little bit bigger. But when you're exponentially growing, you're sort of thinking about your programs that are successful and how you take them to the next level and how you evolve. The case for support, more and more I'm finding, is where potential donors and prospective donors really want to see organizations swing for the fences. It's been so interesting as a female leader in philanthropy to connect with women in business who are now becoming large and big time major gift philanthropists to organizations, joining boards of organizations, sharing their wisdom at the table. And I was most recently involved in a conversation where a leader of a Fortune 100 company said, the nonprofit sector really is the original space for innovation. It's where people would give their dollars to say, let's see what we can do with a little bit of startup capital and a really great idea, and sort of no rules as to sort of what's possible, what's not possible, and really swing for the fences and see what we can do. And because of that, we've been able to find cures to diseases. Because of philanthropy, we've been able to expand on the ways that we deliver education, think about museum and cultural institutional experiences in diverse and different ways. The case for support is where you want to get really, really creative and explain to donors, sort of why your work and how their investment is going to take the organization above and beyond where it's going to go. Most importantly, feature people in your case. Think about how a donor can see themselves in that narrative and want to join the work that you're doing. Now we think about leadership. We spend a lot of time at CCS in working with our client partners on building relationships with volunteer leadership, understanding their skills, understanding sometimes insecurities or areas where they're not comfortable with the work of fundraising or the sort of business of philanthropy. We also spend a lot of time getting to know how somebody wants to be worked with, because volunteer leadership is incredibly unique to the philanthropic sector or the third sector or the nonprofit sector. People who are willing to give the greatest resource of all, which is their time and sort of nothing else, but also end up becoming donors as well. People who are willing to give their time is extraordinarily rare. And people who are willing to give their time in such a way that they offer full accountability, they show up in all the ways that they are asked to show up, even if it's outside their comfort zones. They answer the call, they weed through sort of the tangled mess. These people are valuable and they're very rare. And we're very grateful in the nonprofit sector to meet so many extraordinary volunteer leaders who partner with institutional leadership. They partner with consultants to swing for the fences, to think about how we can raise community capital to try to tackle some challenge or tackle some goal in our community that's going to make a difference for current or future generations. These people are the best champions of mission. These are the people who are interested in growing philanthropic community. And so it's not just our development staff, but it's people who really want to champion the work of development staff. There are people whose voices should be included in this work. When we think about volunteer leadership and building a cohort or a committee of volunteer leaders, one of the first questions we ask is whose voice needs to be at the table for this? And what we find more often than not is that it always includes the voices of women. it always includes the voices of women of color. And, it always kind of factors in that there are many people who need to be part of conceptually sort of planning for an idea or planning for the way forward. Swing for the fences is a baseball term. And so, sort of looking to knock one out of the park, looking to do something extraordinary, right? And knowing that if you sort of shoot for the moon, you'll land among the stars. And so when we think about our nonprofit missions, we think about the things that we're raising money for. Thanks, Deborah. We think about, how do we go big? How do we go big authentically, genuinely, with every best effort that we have, and then either we hit our mark or we fall just short of it, but still accomplish some really great things together. Thinking again about leadership, it's not just about who you recruit or who you bring to the table, but it's also about how you utilize them. And that's why, again, we spend so much time and encourage all of you to spend time getting to know your volunteer leaders. How do they want people to work with them? Are they best accessed by phone or by email? Is it better to get together with them and set up a shared file? They can review materials there. When you get together, there's working meetings. These people want to be helpful. Volunteer leaders want to look at lists and help provide information where they can. They want to open the door to the organization for others because it's part of the work that they love. We often find that volunteer leaders are interested in lending their insights, being part of solicitation strategies, and also championing some of the fundraising priorities and organizational strategies that are going on in the work that you do. It's such an honor to lead board retreats and to lead facilitated sessions with board members, especially when they happen after hours or on the weekends, because you really see people bring their thinking to the table at a time when most people would be resting or sleeping. And in these meetings and doing them over, a period of 12 years with CCS, one thing that really stands out about the most exceptional volunteer leaders is those people who are actually willing to disagree. It's easy to kind of nod your head and go along with the flow because that is passive, and passive sometimes leads to progress. But it's harder when something doesn't look right. To not just say, hey, maybe we should be thinking about this differently, but then also to push yourself as a volunteer leader to think a little bit about what the solutions could be and lean on the goodwill you've built with your other volunteer leaders, your peers, to really build consensus and find a way to a different solution. And Julie is such a great example of that and her role on the board at the History Center. So I'm excited for us to hear from her in just a little bit. The other area we talked about as a fundraising fundamental is prospective donors. And as I mentioned to you earlier, 15 years ago or so, we were really heavily reliant on historical giving information. We gave analysis, some work on zip codes and sourcing potential high net worth people using zip codes. But a lot of it was guesswork and it required tons and tons of qualification. Back then, which is true now, Major Gifts Fundraising has always taken the approach of top down. So thinking about your best prospect first, if you look at this constituency model picture here, your best prospects are the people that are in that center circle, the people who are closest to the work that you're doing. If someone is giving time, which is the greatest resource, then it's most likely that this person is also going to be giving their capital. And those board members are in a position to open doors for you. So the hope is that they're also introducing new major donors who then become recurring major donors to the work that you're doing. And then we also find that in the circle of that sort of innermost leadership, management is a part of that as well. But thinking about how you are stewarding internal management around even some type of level of engagement, we see this a lot at universities and at hospitals, is really important as well. So top down and then inside out, the circle as well, that constituency model, best prospects first, largest donors first, and then working your way from there. We often find that in data, surveyed data, but also in conversations we do through feasibility study interviews, that most individuals say that they give because somebody simply asked them. It is typical human intuition to want to be helpful and to want to find a way to yes. And so many of us have seen those videos of people on the street that sort of try to stop someone and ask them for a favor. The hardest part is kind of getting their attention and getting them to stop. We find that in fundraising a lot, right? Through the mass appeals that we might be doing for our organizations, we push out a lot of information just trying to get someone's attention. And once we have someone's attention, it becomes exponentially easier to then move them to some sort of action. And how we do that is, especially in the work of fundraising, is by developing a compelling case, by thinking about how we might establish credibility through known leadership or through an articulation of who is at the helm of this, how are we going to ensure that this project is going to get done, and then by making an ask, at the right time. And so thinking about this top-down, inside-out model, your closest friends first, and then working your way out to the general public, also correlates with a major gift approach. You're not going to ask a stranger for a major gift because you have not yet built the credibility, the relationship. We've not yet teed up the value proposition. You're going to do that with people who are closest to you. And, I've been talking a little bit about the past and now talking about the future. What I'm finding in real time as it relates to the prospect element of fundraising fundamentals is that organizations are spending a lot more time on prospect qualification. And if I could just take a moment to talk about what that means, it means that most organizations already know who their inner circle is. They know who their major donors are. They know that the board is likely among that cohort of major donors. They also know who their loyal donors are. This information has already been discovered, and these are the people that organizations are already working with. What's unknown is who is that next band of major donor, what we call an emerging major donor. What does that landscape look like, and who are those people? And then going one level sort of out even further, who are those mid-level donors? Thinking about the qualification of emerging major donor prospects and mid-level donors, is what's going to lead an organization to its sort of next cohort of major gift donor. And because of the changing landscape of philanthropy, because urgency is constantly shifting, it's hard to stay in touch with people because we've got in-person communication, phone communication, digital communication. It's becoming more and more important for organizations to have that next band of major gift donor ready. And so what we're finding in real time, at least from the CCS fundraising perspective, is just the amount of effort and resources that are going into qualification exercises and dedicating sort of staffing resources to moving through lists of relationships and building these major donor pipelines. Lastly, we talk a little bit, I mentioned a little bit about this related to prospective donors in the previous slide. Acquiring new donors has often been the hardest, but now upgrading and renewing is also becoming challenging as well. There are ways to bring new donors to your landscape, to sort of attract new donors to your landscape. But we are finding that organizations are having to become more and more creative in doing so. As it relates to major giving in particular, we are finding that women philanthropy events are increasingly effective, especially because we're sort of approaching a generation now of women who have acquired wealth, not just inherited it, but really acquired it in their own vein, and are looking for ways to meaningfully plug their resources into a cause or passion that they're deeply connected to. And oftentimes that introduction happens through a friend, it happens through a neighbor or someone that they're socially connected to. And so since COVID, where everything kind of shut down, now that events are coming back on the scene, more and more of our clients are thinking about events for women in philanthropy specifically. And I found that to be a particularly effective way, at least in Southern California, to introduce new people to an organization. Those women may not be the sole decision makers in their philanthropy, but by introducing them to an organization, you sort of introduce the entire family. So that's something to think about as you're considering acquisition strategies that may be in alignment with sort of acquiring new women donors or even new donors of color who are women. Additionally, nurturing and upgrading, right? Thinking about how we build a relationship with someone who's already giving to us in such a way that they understand that as our mission grows, so does our need. our impact on mission grows, so does our need. And so the upgrade strategy becomes critical because there is a period that I've found just from the data analytics work that we do with clients. It's somewhere between 3 to 5 years where if a donor has given in that's sort of the same amount between that 3 to 5 year period, the strategy or the case for then requesting an upgrade becomes just slightly challenging because I think it begs the initial question of, well, what sort of where were you the last 3 to 5 years, right? It's been fine that it's been this way for, this long. Like, why is it different all of a sudden? And so as you think about these nurturing strategies, these upgrading strategies, just understand that relationship is a factor in that. I worked at the ACLU before I worked at CCS, and at the ACLU, the donor base, it's just so large. And so when we think about even just the constituency of mid-level donors, it's very difficult to take a one-to-one approach with those folks. But at an organization at that size, you can put an upgrade request or an increase request in a letter, and typically find that people will respond to that. Just given the size and the scale of the organization, they wouldn't sort of expect that that's something that someone reaches out for in a one-to-one capacity. But I would like organizations that are mid-size or smaller size to consider how you might take a more personalized approach to those nurturing and upgrading strategies. And the same case with renewals. Oftentimes as donors move through the donor life cycle, it doesn't happen on its own. It happens because of an intention from the organization's perspective to really move people in this way. I'm excited to dive into this topic with Julie in just a moment as we think about the sort of building relationships element at the History Center, because Julie and others who've had a long sort of history of connectedness to the organization know donors who either sort of are lower level donors now, prospective donors, longtime donors in different ways throughout the community. So really think about the role of volunteer leadership in helping you to acquire, nurture, and sort of sustain or renew the relationships that you have. It doesn't all have to be on the organization. You will find that volunteer leadership are often willing and eager to help. So lastly, the fundraising plan. And these plans have evolved over the years. Just to kind of think about what they look like when I first started in consulting, the plan really focused on goal and timeline. It really kind of looked at focusing on a number, how long is it going to take to raise that number, who are the different audiences we want to raise this money from, and what are the different strategies we're going to use for major gifts. Since then, there's been a bigger focus on these preparatory activities, thinking about pre-campaign planning, doing work up front on data analytics to really understand what universe are you currently working with and how much money or how much capacity is in your existing universe of relationships. And then what is the delta between that and how much you actually need to raise? Like, these questions are becoming more critically assessed, and the evidence or the answers for some of these questions, there's just a higher degree of validity in that evidence or sort of needing to have validity in that evidence before projects are moving forward. The case for support is a fundraising fundamental that in its essence doesn't really change, but the medium through which we deliver the case is constantly changing. And I do encourage any organization that's thinking about a campaign to undergo a pretty rigorous sort of case for support or case visioning exercise up front, because the reality is that you're not going to be able to escape it when you get into your campaign anyways. At some point, a group of people are going to need to sit down and talk about what exactly are we raising money for here, and what exactly is the impact of those dollars, and how do we tell that story in a way that puts people at the heart of that story. And so just so that we're positioned as an organization, as a campaign, to be presenting the most compelling, the most urgent, and the most effective need possible. And so the case for support, I think in the past, there wasn't a necessity to really dig deep in that case for support because we didn't have the internet as widely as we have it now. We didn't have research as robustly as we have it now, or access to research as robustly as we have it now. But because we do, because we have these tools, there is an expectation from donors, and there is a responsibility on behalf of organizations to be teeing up the case for support in a really thorough, thoughtful way, so that donors can understand the best value for their investment. The fundraising plans that I see today also include a communication strategy, specifically on a timeline. So it's not enough to say that these are the constituents that we want to contact in our campaign. So if you're a school, for example, you would say current families, alumni families, past leadership, former board leadership, and then, friends and grandparents, right? Like those are your general constituencies. It's not enough to just say, these are the folks we want to talk to. And then we want to make sure that we send them 2 or 3 connections each year. It's more prudent and more effective to actually develop a communication strategy that's built on a communications calendar. And so there's a plan built around which team is going to run this, how is it going to look, and then how are we going to measure the effectiveness of each communication as it goes out so that it informs the next piece of the strategy. Gift recognition is also similar. I'm finding more and more that as we think about gift recognition, there's sort of general gift recognition that's based on gift level. So think about a menu of naming opportunities, and you've got different gift levels and a different recognition opportunity for each one. But what does gift recognition look like if you're thinking about it in terms of constituency, or you're thinking about it in terms of many fundraising efforts within your campaign? Really building those into a timeline, thinking about what makes them meaningful and distinct, is really going to help campaign momentum stay high all throughout the fundraising process. The fundraising plan often includes budget, and this is a consideration that is taken into account when you're in that feasibility study and planning process. There's always going to be a cost to raising more money. It takes money to raise money, but within reason, right? And so the benefit of having worked at CCS for so many years, and the benefit of having access to sort of campaign information and knowledge of projects across the world, is being able to see ultimately what was the cost to raise $1 for a lot of these projects. And generally what we've found over the years is that the prudent cost to raise $1 for a fundraising campaign is somewhere between 8 to 12 cents. For larger institutions, think like hospitals or major universities, we often see that cost to raise $1 get a little bit higher to about 15%, because the quality of materials and just the frequency of meeting activity is a lot higher. And then typically for annual fund, if you just want to kind of compare it to something, the cost to raise $1 for annual fund is somewhere between 20 and 25 cents. Only because you're pushing out to a larger audience of people with a lower rate of return on a response to those materials. But with major gift fundraising, as you're thinking about the budget, there should be a tighter cost to raise $1 if you've done the work, and you should have done the work to really think about, what's that tight prospect universe going to look like. And this aligns with resources as well. As you're factoring in budget, thinking about what resources you're going to need to raise the dollars that you're looking for. Oftentimes we find in the budget that the heaviest line item is staffing, because major gifts fundraising is people to people work, especially as we think about, just this idea that women are leading decision makers in philanthropy. I often find that when women are discerning about philanthropic decisions, there is sometimes the desire to get together, to spend some time somewhere, to get to know each other in a more social capacity in order to build that relationship. Making sure the time resources are available for that, the financial resources are available for that, is key to campaign planning. I think additionally, as we consider some campaign resources, your volunteer base, that a campaign requires volunteer leadership, not always complicated subcommittees and tiered leadership structures, but it does require volunteer leadership in some capacity. And how you structure that resource, I think, says a lot about the ability to be successful in an efficient and time-effective way. Thank you. Without further ado, I would love to introduce Julie Connolly, who is our campaign co-chair at the San Diego History Center. I want to make sure we have our text set so we can see you, Julie. Maybe we can spotlight you. Hey there. How are you, Julie?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's so interesting hearing everything you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much for making the time. I'd love to turn it over to you just to introduce yourself, and then I have a series of questions for you, and maybe you and I can just engage in a little bit of dialogue.
That would be wonderful. That would be great. Well, as you said, I'm a fourth generation San Diegan. I'm lucky that both of my parents are native San Diegans, and I grew up always hearing about their endeavors and their parents' endeavors to help make San Diego a better place. And they've worked in a wide range of different things. So I grew up volunteering, and I knew that this was my destiny and my responsibility to our city. So it was very important to me to help out. And I've done a lot of work with different organizations and Rady Children's Hospital and things like that. But when the opportunity came up for the San Diego History Center to join their board of trustees in 2018, it was kind of perfect. They were just finishing a feasibility study of sorts to reimagine the museum. And they were going to start kicking off a campaign in early 2020. And as we all know, everything came to a grinding halt. So it was kind of perfect as I became more experienced with the organization, that when we came time about a little more than a year ago to ramp up our campaign and really reimagine our museum, it was kind of perfect timing. And I was leading a development committee while we were trying to go through names and figure things out, looking at past donations, all of those type of things. And we we needed help. We had gone in the past before the pandemic to some major donors, and we didn't have a case for support. We didn't have things on paper, and they said, well, this all sounds great, but what have you got? So as we were working together, we met monthly, biweekly. We were trying to figure out where to go with this thing. And we had hired, one or two people on an hourly basis to try and help us. And we really knew that we needed a bigger gun to help organize us. And at the same time, we had learned about CCS from their work in the park with the Old Globe and the San Diego Museum of Art. So it was kind of perfect to bring it together, because in the past, our in-house fundraising wasn't effective with what we thought we needed to make, which is a substantial amount of money to really reimagine our museum. Our museum isn't really well known, even though we're pushing our 100-year anniversary. Most, researchers know about us, genealogists know about us. We are the keeper of San Diego's history. We have insane archives that anybody can make an appointment to come view and to look at. But as far as our exhibits go, it's more rotating exhibits every 18 months or so, highlighting just a small slice of history that we would change out every few years. And so we really want to create a destination where the entire history of our region can be told and shared with visitors and residents and schools, and become a resource for our city, and using all the new technology where it will be very experiential and a wonderful place to visit. And so it was kind of perfect to work with CCS to get us to that goal.
Yeah. And Julie, I remember meeting you when we first started talking about all this work, and truly being blown away from our CCS perspective that a group of volunteer leaders could have possibly made the pre-campaign planning progress that you all had made. I mean, when we met you, without, there is development staff at the History Center, but not really anyone formally focused on the campaign. So without having that formal dedicated staff, the History Center had a prospect list. You had sort of an idea of potential naming opportunities. There was a table of gifts. There was a couple of drafts of the case for support. So there was these materials that we're typically not used to seeing from volunteer leadership. And so I was immediately blown away by just the level of accountability and ownership that you and other board members, other trustees at the History Center had. And I remember us talking early on about the co-chair role for the campaign. And thinking about, especially you being a woman at the History Center, the fact that the history of San Diego has sort of a pointed sort of narrative as it relates to women that we want to see come through in the future of the work and in the efforts of the campaign. What was the deciding factor for you? What made you decide to want to be a co-chair for this effort?
Well, I really, I believe in the mission. I do believe that, that there is not a place to come and learn about San Diego's history. I'm devoted to this city. My license plate says love my SD. I mean, I'm really in on this, but they're also, I'm learning through my kids as they've grown up in the school system, they're not being taught the whole history. All fourth graders in California have to learn about, they do a mission project and learn about the missions, and that's kind of all they learn about. But there's so much more. We have such a rich history, and there isn't a place to consolidate all of that. So I believe in what it's a need that our city has, and I think that's one of the reasons that it was just a perfect fit. It was almost magical as it all came together at the same time. Of course, it's a daunting task. I still wonder what I'm doing, but you know, I am very excited about it, and I know that with dedication and working with my crew and you guys, that we're going to make it happen.
For sure. One thing you said to me earlier that stands out is just that, failure is not an option. We're going to get this done. It's going to happen. And a lot of times that is the attitude that we need from a campaign co-chair. I appreciate your honesty that it does feel like a daunting task. And a lot of that daunt or that feeling comes from the timeline, right? I'd love if we could go to the next slide and kind of talk about a little bit of what it means to be campaign co-chair is in some ways taking this sort of ownership and accountability of getting through the timeline that we committed to as an organization. So the nonprofit structure is an executive CEO or an executive director who's been placed by the board of directors, this corpus of people who have a community responsibility to manage this 501c3. And so when we ask the question of accountability and at the end of the day, who is really responsible, the answer is all of us. And yet the answer is one or two of us, right? Because it can't be all of us unless there's a couple people who really step forward and take a look at the timeline and hold to it. I want to take the group just a little bit through the types of activities you all have gone through, Julie, and anywhere you feel like jumping in, any part of the process that really stood out to you or you want to reflect on, like please feel free to jump in. But when we were working with the History Center, we actually didn't do this sort of exercise, if you will, to deeply dive into the pre-campaign planning. We did the sort of standard pre-campaign planning exercise, 3 months, looking to figure out how much money can we raise here and how much money is readily available. And Julie, when we met you, leadership was divided, right? There was not everybody believed that we needed to do a feasibility study. Some people felt that it was necessary. Some people felt that it wasn't necessary. And I was really, really proud of, and I think all organizations should use this as an example, the way that you were able to openly discuss this difficult topic and say, here are the reasons that we need the hard evidence for pursuing this campaign. And for other folks to say, here are the reasons that we should just go ahead without it because we got to get this money anyways. Any reflections on the feasibility study and how it was particularly insightful for you?
Absolutely. I was one of those people who did not, it was a big expense and all of those things. I said, it doesn't matter what happens with phase 1 because we know there's going to be a phase 2. Let's just go into that. And it was very interesting to learn. It really helped us gauge by interviewing deep interviews with so many prospective donors, with our board members, with volunteers, and I think we had more than 40 really in-depth conversations. It helped us gauge exactly our potential, which, like I said, there is no failure here. We're going to go for it, but it helped us realize exactly the potential funds that we can expect and should go for, which is some values that we did not have. We just knew that we needed to go. So it really qualified our donor base and what we needed to do. It helped us set a budget as we're also interviewing design firms and hiring them to say, okay, GCS thinks we have the potential to do this, and therefore let's just plan on that. And because it's very, very qualified data. It wasn't just, it's not just AI, it's very specific after conversations with our people looking at our lists. So it was a very valuable thing in the end. And I'm glad we did phase one.
And I think it socialized these elements of case leadership prospect plan. So think about the pre-campaign planning process as the starting point of us talking about some of those things and what is our shared understanding around each of those core elements. And then what do those things actually need to look like when we're in campaign planning and activation? On this next slide here, I've outlined a little bit of what the San Diego History Center campaign looks like today. And Julie, you've been with us the entire way. I can't stress enough, like you're along for the ride every single week. You come to every single meeting. You are the most active volunteer, among the most active volunteers I know, and you answer the phone any time of day. So I feel very confident that you can take our group through where the History Center is in each of these areas and kind of what you're thinking about now and what that means for some next steps.
Absolutely. I think that the case for support that you guys helped us put together and took what we had started and really fine-tuned it with a goal towards fundraising was very valuable. And that was the thing that we were sitting around the table a year ago with our development committee going, how are we even going to put this together? Our donors want to see what we want to do. And it really helped take our ideas and a reimagined new museum to put something on paper, to put something in a PDF on a deck that we can share with people and share with them before we meet with them and help them understand, even some of our trustees, to really get them on board and to feel, and buy in on what's happening and to become part of our fundraising team. You made the talking points, you helped us, and we're just getting started here. Well, a little more, but the talking points in helping us understand the donors that we're talking to and the potential and their history. It's more than a wealth screening, which is, we were like, well, why don't we buy wealth screening software? Well, this takes us to a higher level of being able to really understand the potential of and the motivations of our donors, even donors that we thought we knew very well. So we're looking forward to putting that through. And you've done such great training of our committee, and we've had multiple trains. And I mean, gosh, I did telemarketing and college to get money, and it was very interesting to see some of in the training, it was triggering that, and to have all of our committee and those of us that are making calls go through the training, and that's very, very specific. If you hear this is how you should respond. And it's very valuable even for seasoned fundraisers that think that they've got all the answers. It was very valuable, so the training of our volunteer committee. And something that's very, very also important is us going to all of our trustees to get the 100% board participation. It's interesting as we're just getting started, going outside of our inner circle. That's a question that we're being asked. What does the board think? What are they doing? And being able to reply that we have 100% board participation. That's a valuable tool that I didn't really understand how powerful it was. So you guys brought us in on that, and that's our first goal, and we're getting there. We're almost there. So it's very good, and so you've been leading us through campaign visits. We're helping us understand prospects. We're talking all the time. Like we've been emailing this morning on potential for some donors, and Aashika and Hannah are there, and they help us try and figure it out and look at different angles of how we can best understand and angle conversations for the best thing. And it's very good to have like a third party in the room to kind of help guide and advise us that. And you've also helped for me personally, like understanding, there are other ways to give than just simply writing a check. And there's some really very advantageous ways to get donors to give, like a stock transfer or something like that. It's just a really interesting angle where, people have some stock with some significant capital gains. They can donate that stock and get the full write-off. Nobody has to pay any capital gains. The organization gets the full amount. The donor gets the write-off as the full amount. And that's just meaningful in estate planning and those type of things, because we're looking not just for our campaign, but we're looking to fund us into the future. And asking those questions about estate planning seems awkward, but it actually is powerful as well. And we have people who are saying, yeah, I'll do this bit now, but I'll include you in my estate plan. So that's really cool, when we were just asking for checks, so the business plan that you guys helped us develop is also very, very powerful. And we have some major donors who really want to see the numbers, and it was nice to have you guys advise us as we went through it. It makes our campaign stronger to just have something right there to say, flip, here you go. This is where we see it. This is where we expect the money to be, where, income generating future growth. It's been really great. And now we're at the stage where we're starting to wonder what's going to happen, when our contract with you runs out. And you guys have been really influential. And so we're in the final stages of looking to hire, someone in-house that will be part of the team as a mid-level manager, not as a, super high expensive campaign, person, but like a really dedicated mid-level employee who's you guys have helped us find and interview, and hopefully will train to take over when the whole CCS steps back, so that we're continuing with these goals and with these fundamentals that you guys have prepared for us. It really makes it seem like we're just so much well suited for success, and the little things, it's just really brought our whole campaign to a fine point. And I'm confident that we're going to get there.
Julie, it's so kind of you to give us credit for so many of these things, but it really is all of you. We are just a facilitator in this work. And as you're speaking, it dawned on me that one of the greatest benefits of the partnership has been how many solicitors the History Center has gained just in its volunteer leadership. Like, you're fully capable and willing to go out and raise major gifts for the organization. I think of 3 or 4 other board members who are in the exact same position, including the CEO. And I just think about how greatly that benefits the organization, because we know that the correlation between activity and the number of asks that you're scheduling and dollars raised is very close. Like, you have to be able to facilitate a certain amount of activity in order to raise the gifts that you're looking for. And that getting to that critical mass, one solicitor is not going to get you there. Multiple people out in the community talking to people about giving, that's what's going to get you to hit your benchmarks. And the History Center is just such a great example of that. I so appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. I have a couple of slides to round us out, but I'm just so grateful to you, to the History Center, for our partnership, and also just for the inspiration that you provide to me and others about how women in philanthropy are driving decision-making, are brokering consensus, and are helping organizations think about how to diversify the donor pool in as many ways as possible. So thank you, Julie.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I really enjoy working with you and the team, and all the potential ahead of us. Thank you.
Thanks. So looking forward, as I think about all the investments that places like the History Center and our other clients make in fundraising solutions, what they're aspiring for is a balanced fundraising model, like the model you see here. When you think about, what the distribution of a ideal shop, I hate to say that because there's so many successful shops, but just an ideal shop would be, the bottom of the pyramid is sort of your annual fund gifts or your renewable gifts. You want to be raising money, small amounts of money, from a large number of people. It's really good for visibility building. It's good to make sure that your mission is relevant, that it is socialized, and that more and more people are finding a way to access your organization and support it. So investing in a strong annual fund program is key, but thinking about how to ensure somewhere between 10 to 30% of your revenue is coming from that group is satisfactory. Really, 70 to 90% of your giving should be coming from the top 2 levels of the triangle, of the pyramid. Major gifts and plain gifts are those gifts that are going to sustain your organization. And when we think about this example with the History Center, major gifts is such an important part of not just building the future of the museum, but also making sure that the annual operations, that the sustainability of the museums is anchored by major giving, either now or a program that will help to bring in those major gifts in the future. We typically find that donors move up this pyramid as their engagement increases with an organization. So think about your donor base in the context of this pyramid. Where do people fall today, and what are you going to do with them in relationship building to help move them up? And this applies to everything from annual giving to major gifts. When we think about the areas or the sort of tactical approaches to fundraising, these are the different components that we're considering. Activity correlates to dollars raised. The only way to sort of predict how much money you're going to raise is to do some sort of predictive modeling, to do some type of data analytics work. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be successful. You actually have to act on that data. You have to actually build activities around that data. You have to resource that data. Are there enough people to qualify that data, to work it, to move on that information and to establish contact, to start building relationships? And is that work anchored in metrics? If you can't measure yourself against something, you're not able to see if your resources are being directed in the right place and if they're actually being effective. And it's also not great for institutional resources either, because with so much development turnover and change of careers, professionals are really looking to build on the work of their predecessors. And so thinking about metrics actually helps to position the organization well for the long term, because a future leader can see how you were measuring operations and then build from there. Same thing with prospects. What the way you're thinking about prospect evolution and the tools around prospecting matters. All of this informs your fundraising strategies and how you're going to be able to effectively raise money. The last note, or one of the last notes I want to make, is just about thinking about creativity and donor communications. In a recent 2022 survey, we asked folks coming out of the pandemic, how do your donors prefer to be engaged? How do they want to hear from you? And it was really good to see that targeted communications, whether it's email or mail, is still the most effective way. But what was most interesting is sort of the third, fourth from the bottom there, online programming or social media. About half of organizational donors want to hear about ways to give or ways to join giving through some type of social platform or through some type of social community building. And so thinking about that, thinking about your presence on the web and what resources you're investing into that is going to make a really big difference. It's only in working with humanitarian aid organizations about 8 years ago that I started to see that you can raise $1 million gifts online. I did my master's in fundraising at NYU with the famous Naomi Levine, who raised over $1 billion for NYU in her career as a fundraiser. And at that time, she would always say that there'll never be $1 million gift that comes in online. And she's no longer with us, but I would love for her to be able to just see how quickly that has changed and how quickly other things will change in the future as well. This is my last slide. We've got just about 2 minutes left. Please do just think about, as you're evolving those online giving programs, think about those mid-level giving pipelines, those emerging major donor pipelines, the time and the resources that you're putting into building those groups of people, because that's really going to inform your major donor pipeline going forward. And then lastly, thinking about artificial intelligence or AI. At CCS, we think about AI as it relates to fundraising in a couple of different ways. Of course, predictive modeling. How do we use donation history in a donor data set to predict future actions and outcomes? How do we use AI to think about segmentation? And of course, how do we think about AI such as ChatGPT to help generate stewardship pieces and move stewardship forward? These are all very quickly evolving areas that will allow us to be leaner in our work as fundraising operators. And we're really excited to continue this web series with you all to talk a little bit more about what this looks like going forward. Thank you again for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.